Today I'm at the Driven to Win exhibit at the Henry Ford.
A lot of people visiting the Henry Ford Museum may not care too much about this car. They may look at it and think, oh, that's a neat looking car, big dragster. This particular car means a lot to me. This was a car driven by Gary Ormsby. Gary Ormsby won one world championship.
1989.
In Top Fuel. He did it, well, he finished the season anyway with this car. It was tuned by the legendary crew chief Lee Beard, one of the greatest crew chiefs of all time. Gary was mostly a West Coast racer. He raced all the way back in the days of front-engine dragsters. Started off racing by driving a car that the guys that he knew at a car dealership where he worked had a Top Fuel car, and he wanted to drive it and eventually had the opportunity to do so and loved it and kept doing it. Gary himself would end up owning car dealerships out in California. On his way to winning the World Championship in 1989, Gary had two bad accidents. The first was in Sonoma, California, a little bit past the halfway point in the season, when the rear wing collapsed. The wing struts had an issue and the wing collapsed, lost all downforce on the rear of the car. And the car turned over upside down and slid to a stop. I remember seeing a picture of the roll cage after they had uprighted the car. He wasn't hurt in the accident. It had almost ground through the roll bar. They started using thicker tubing after that. The team didn't have a suitable backup car. They ended up purchasing a car similar to what they had from another racer. And 2 races later, the car went into a wheel stand in round number 1 in Brainerd, Minnesota. And Gary tried to pedal it, tried to get it to come down softly, but it ended up not coming down. He finally let off completely, and when the car landed, it hit the guard wall, completely destroyed the car. They were still leading the points in Top Fuel, and so they ended up going back and getting one of their old cars that Gary had on the showroom of his car dealership, just on display. They got that car, they put all their modern stuff on it, and took it to an additional 2 races before they brought out this car. They brought this car out at the race in Topeka, Kansas, which I believe was the 4th to the final race on the NHRA series that year. They didn't have time to paint it. It was just aluminum or magnesium, whatever the body's made out of, unpainted, and then they put the Castrol GTX and all the decals on it. When this car debuted at the end of 1989, it was among the most modern Top Fuel designs. It was the future. And cars today, yes, this looks different than what we have today, 35 years down the road. But if you compare the previous 35 years prior to this car and compare this to what they had 35 years prior, not even in the same category. This is basically what a Top Fuel dragster looks like today. Very similar. This was the last major evolution in Top Fuel dragster design. And this was the very beginning of that design phase. Gary came back in 1990 and continued racing. Came very close to winning the 1990 World Championship. It went down to the final round at the last race of the year. Joe Amato beat him. But still a really, really strong season. He came back in 1991. They had a preseason crash, which didn't really set the stage for them. About a third of the way into the 1991 season, Gary got out of the car. They parked the car due to what they were basically saying was illness. Turned out that Gary had a cancer that he'd known about and had been treating since not too long after his 1989 championship was won. And, you know, they thought he could beat it. And it got to a point where he had to go on to chemotherapy, which weakened his body. And at some point he got an infection, which his body wasn't able to fight in that weakened state. And he passed away. When I saw Gary Ormsby run at the 1990 Spring Nationals in Columbus, Ohio, that this likely would have been the car that I saw him driving. And I remember seeing him there at the race, and specifically, I remember my dad pointing him out to me. He was standing like on the in the doorway of his trailer. Gary always had really nice equipment, really nice trucks, trailers, cars. Crew always looked sharp. I remember seeing him standing there in the doorway and thinking, that guy's Gary Ormsby? My dad's, yeah. Gary was a really small stature guy. He was kind of short, small framed, and I remember just thinking to myself, wow, that's not quite exactly what he looks like on TV, because the TV you can't quite, usually see their height. That's my Gary Ormsby story.
Gary Ormsby, but he was to get one last shot. It's the man from Roseville, California, for bragging rights and the Winston title of the event.
The $1,000 in Joe's pocket.
I tell you what, he'd give that $50K back in a hot second if he could have won the Winston title. But that was not to be. Now it's all pride at stake, and a power wheel stand for Amato spelled his demise. Gary Ormsby wins the event. You wanted a shot at Amato. You wanted to leave here saying, I'm the champion. It's no fluke. You got him.
I did, Steve. Thank you. Thank you. We got it. The guys did a wonderful job for me. We had adversity this race and had a little bit of luck in the semifinals, and they put it all back together, and it was a great victory for us.
The final standings in Top Fuel, Ormsby first, Amato.
Just before Gary passed, well, a month or two before he passed, they put Gordy Bonin, who's another guy who's passed on since then. They put him in the driver's seat for a race or two. And then they ended up selling the team to Walt Austin, who was known for his son driving the alcohol funny car that they had, Pat Austin. And he started driving, well, they bought the team. It was no longer Gary's team. They bought it, and Pat drove the Castrol Top Fuel Dragster from the U.S. Nationals in 1991 on through 1995. They had a Castrol sponsorship. People recognize the Castrol GTX sponsorship mostly with John Force. John Force was not connected to this team except for the sponsorship. It was the same sponsorship program. Castrol had a car in pretty well every NHRA class. Gary had it in Top Fuel, John Force had it in Funny Car. And when the Top Fuel Dragster program went away with Pat Austin, and that car went away, John Force, that's when he brought out a second car, and he became a multi-car team owner at that point and has been ever since. Lee Beard continued tuning the car to the end of 1991 and got Pat Austin his first win, got Pat Austin his first 4-second run, and then he ended up going on in 1992 to work for Larry Minor Racing, or Larry Minor Motorsports, which had they had just brought out the McDonald's sponsorship in the Top Fuel Dragster and Funny Car. And so he tuned Ed McCullough for a couple of years in Top Fuel, and then continued working with Larry Minor, eventually Joe Gibbs, when Joe Gibbs had the McDonald's deal. And he continued on for many, many years. In fact, he's still involved in the sport as a consultant, and you'll see him around the racetrack occasionally. Very, very, very successful crew chief in Top Fuel. Gary Ormsby program, this is where he started, and where he became a household name in the world of NHRA. Also connected to this car, working with Lee Beard, is a guy by the name of Mike Green. And Mike Green has also become a top crew chief in the Top Fuel ranks. In fact, in 2024, they came within just a whisker of winning the World Championship with the car that he tunes, driven by Justin Ashley. So yeah, I just saw this car sitting here. The first time I saw it here, I thought, wow, Gio, Gary Ormsby. I do not know where this car was between the time that it was retired and the time that the museum got it. It does look like the original paint, although it looks really immaculate. You know, they maybe had to go back and touch it up somehow to perfect it, but it doesn't look like it's been repainted or re-decaled. And it's just beautiful. Of course, Gary always had really pretty cars. But I saw this thing sitting here and I thought, I'm going to do a video on that. I know that it's not everybody's cup of tea. Probably won't be my highest viewed video by any means, but I wanted to share it for anybody out there who might have liked to have seen this car sitting here. See it down the road. And I'm sure you saw this car in the background, and I can't leave here without at least mentioning it, that this was a Willys-bodied gasser owned and tuned and driven by Ohio George Montgomery, who just recently passed away. Ohio George Montgomery was from the Dayton, Ohio area and was huge back in the 60s. Back when my dad was into hot rodding, Ohio George Montgomery, that would have been a big deal back then.